What is self-leadership? Welcome to another episode of Relearning Leadership, where we explore a specific leadership challenge and break it down to help improve your leadership, your organization, and just possibly your personal life. I'm Pete Behrens, and today I'm honored to have a chat with Nick Jonsson. Nick is a best-selling author, an Ironman top 1% world athlete, and an executive mental health advocate. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you so much, Pete. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm pleased to have you on the show, and I want to start simple. So let's just start with the basics. How do you define self-leadership?
Well, Pete, I can first say by saying I lived both. I lived a life without practicing the self-leadership, and I lived a life with practicing self-leadership. And everyone don't have to go that far to define it, to find out for yourself, because it's painful. And I'm happy to explain today from both sides. But how I define it basically is, especially as a leader, as we're talking about today, that it is about being able to influence yourself or being able to perhaps parent yourself. So let's look at it like this. When we grew up as children, our parents made sure that we went to bed by 8 p.m. Our teachers were there to tell us to do our homework. There was someone there who told us what to do. Then suddenly in the teens, we are breaking free from all these rules. We are fighting over it. We want to demonstrate to the world that we are in charge of our own life. And we do it quite well. And most of us do it quite well. And suddenly we are on our own devices. There's no one anymore who's telling us when to go to bed. There's no one who's telling us what we should do. So we are basically in charge of our own life. We have to parent ourselves. And with that comes a big responsibility on our shoulders. And either we fall into the habit of being in a pity me or feeling sorry for ourselves and having that self-talk and influence ourselves out of things. Or on the other side, we can have a positive story and discipline ourselves, getting out of bed early, making our bed, starting the day with a good habit, and then having positive self-thoughts, and the actions and the goals and the lives that then follow is completely different.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from that is discipline, right? Self-discipline, ability to self-direct, ability to self-choose wisely in some ways. I know a lot of my colleagues, we work independent coaches and trainers and things like that. And a number of them that jumped into this field admitted, right, like this is really hard because nobody's telling me what to do, like when to do it, how to do it, right? Everything is coming from within. Am I reading this right?
Yes, absolutely. What we keep getting to here, Pete, is indeed self-discipline. And again, this is something that has to come from within. And I have a teenage son now who's soon turning 14. And as much as I would love him to go and attend, his handball classes, I would like him to continue his swimming academy. There's only so much I can do. I mean, it has to come from him. He has to want this. He need to really want this from his heart. If I push him, he's going to push me away as a father. So that's why what we're talking about here, already starting from a young age, that it has to come from within, and he has to discipline himself. He has to start already at that age, understand that the actions of him doing exercise, disciplining, looking after himself versus skipping this, which will then perhaps set the scene for the rest of his life.
So I can see this for, as you described, that teenager coming of age. I can see this for the entrepreneur. You've been obviously a world-class athlete, maybe still are a world-class athlete, right? That discipline to train and drive yourself to a peak performance. Connect us to the everyday leader. Connect us to the person who's in the system. I've got a boss. They tell me what to do. I don't maybe see myself necessarily as the leader or having that power and status. What can they take from this?
I think it comes down to the basic here, Pete. And indeed, you don't have to go as extreme as I have. And we'll maybe touch on later today and also because I hit the extreme at the low end when I hit the rock bottom as well. And when I was broken both physically and mentally. And now, yes, I'm perhaps at the peak at the other end. But for the average people, the average leaders or the most leaders, let's say that, who are out there, I would say the most don't look after themselves. And Pete, I'm working with 700 senior leaders here in Singapore. Most are regional directors for the big multinationals. It's all the big American companies. They are placed in Singapore on expat packages and deals, right? And they're working around the clock. 12, 16-hour working day. They are flying around the different countries. Yes, they're flying first class or business class, and they have a good apartment. They have a car and a driver. They have maid and nannies. The children are in private school and all the rest of it. So on the outside, this looks wonderful. But the basics here is they're not getting enough sleep. They probably don't have enough time for more than 1 or 2 gym sessions or exercise sessions in a week. They're eating whatever is served to them. They don't really have the time to think about that. They have no time for meditation, self-care, and getting that peace of mind and quietness that they deserve and what they should do if they were looking after themselves. It's almost like you're running after that hamster wheel, and they only look at themselves perhaps when they are in the 50s and they end up in a hospital, by a burnout or by high blood pressure or a stroke, or as happened to many during the lockdowns, people, ended up in hospitals because they were burnt out, because they're neglecting themselves. So that is not at the extreme end. This is what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis, and that's what I wrote the book about.
And the book you're referring to is Executive Loneliness. Is that right?
Yes, exactly, because it's very typical for leaders to work too hard, to focus too much on the outside. What does the career look like? How am I performing? And then behind the scene is a completely different picture where the leaders feel isolated, feel lonely, feel that they have so much pressure on yourselves to keep up with this. And in order to cope, what I've seen, and I've talked about this in my book, leaders typically then find addictions, and can be everything from gambling, social media, food addiction, or alcohol or drugs. It's just something to get that escape, instead of taking a step back and looking after the basics with a health, nutrition, and sleep and exercise, which according to me is the foundation we're talking about here for self-leadership.
Kind of getting back to the root, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Food, sustenance, eating well, sleep, right? Getting enough rest. You talk about mental, and maybe meditative, right? To kind of clearing the mind. What are some of those challenges that I think that leaders are facing that prevent them maybe from taking more action here?
Yes, I think, Pete, it comes down to the basics here. And I mean, if we look back a bit in history, and I recently read a book called The Oxygen Advantage, talking about breathing and, looking back at the breathing patterns and exercise and so on. And they were saying, us human beings, they said we were not born to become Olympians. They're exercising 5-7 hours per day. That's too much at the intensity level. But neither were we born to walk around 20 minutes a day, and that's all we are moving. So they were looking at somewhere in between. And in this book, The Oxygen Advantage, they said that probably we need to move around 5 hours per day. That could be walking around and moving around, and that's what we did back in history, when we were perhaps walking around, picking berries, doing things, moving our body around. And they believe that probably around 2 hours of quite physical exercise, doing something. So that could be, a bit of jogging, cycling, or going to gym, doing some weights. So that's what they say per day. And that's basically the recommendations we get now to do per week. So I'm saying here that, we are sitting in an office, we're working too much, we are not looking after ourselves, we are not getting out, we're not getting out in the nature to relax and so on and reboot ourselves. It's just a constant drive. And that is what I'm seeing with, at least with senior leaders, that, they just don't look after themselves. And so that's why I'm saying that it starts at the foundation. It starts with the basics. And again, you're right that, Pete, it's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. How can we jump to fulfill ourselves at the top? And that's what we are trying to do now. We forgot about looking after the basics. We go straight to the top. And when we want to do that, then we fall to shortcuts. And that's where perhaps bad habits and addictions comes in.
Well, I know, you talk about hitting a low and maybe getting kind of that wake-up call. I know personally, getting an extremely high cholesterol reading from your doctor and a chew out from your cardiologist that says, if you don't change your lifestyle, something's going to, change it for you. Does it take that call to action, or have you seen this where, there is change without hitting that rock bottom?
Well, there's something called the gift of inspiration. But in recovery, as I was in recovery myself in 2018 after I hit rock bottom, there's a saying in recovery saying the gift of desperation. And I believe many times we as humans, especially if you're very busy and you're running your own business, sadly, we need to end up in hospital. We need to have a close friend who perhaps die of suicide, or something terrible need to happen for us to get that wake-up call to change our habits. It seems like, working on ourselves, changing our habits is so difficult. Perhaps the hardest things we can do, because we have to admit to ourselves that we have a problem. We have to be willing to change it, and then we have to change, and then we have to show to the world. We have to become vulnerable and honest. So that's why it really takes that perhaps gift of desperation in order to make dramatic change.
So blessed the leader who can discover that without hitting rock bottom. What advice do you have, like when you're engaging with a leader who might be, challenged in some of these dimensions? What do you do? How do you help them? What might you recommend to our listeners to maybe a first step they could take towards a better self-leadership?
Yeah, and again here it's making it simple, and it's baby steps, and perhaps working with a coach or a mentor, or if in many other programs it's called a sponsor, someone who help you to take an honest look at yourself. And what I did, and my first step in the book I wrote, is about taking stock. And let's look at it like this, Pete. If you are a business owner, or you run a business, or especially if it's a shop, or you're a shop owner, you would do a stock count every month, a quarter, or once a year, where you look at your inventory, and you will have a good look at what is there. But how often do we do this as human beings or as leaders? Bring out a pen and paper and write down everything, and it can be everything there. I'm 30 pounds overweight. I'm spending too much money on gambling. I'm spending 3 hours on social media. I have broken relationships with my parents. I don't speak with my sister. All these things need to go on this inventory list. And then we need to take this list to a coach or a mentor, or someone who can help us to go through this and clear this baggage. And so it's about, taking an honest look at ourselves first. And we don't have to tackle everything on the list, but getting a couple of small wins. And for me and many others, that it starts with exercise. If you start addressing the exercise, then it's easy to get that right. If you exercise well, you naturally want to eat better. And if you exercise and eat better, you're naturally going to sleep better. So then you get the three foundations. And here again comes Maslow's hierarchy of needs back. Then once you get that right, you will start to get more peace of mind. Your resting heart rate will go down. With that, all your blood levels will be better. And you're already on your path. But what I find, and as we talk about leaders here, it's also about deflating the ego. It's really, really to take a look at themselves in the sense of, am I too much up myself? Am I too important? Am I the center of the universe? Is it me who's running the show? Or is it something I can do for other people, being of service, perhaps signing up for a local charity as a volunteer? Those can be the steps to start with, Pete.
Yeah, getting past the cognitive bias, getting past, that veil we put over ourselves, right? That's incredibly difficult. And I like your advice about get some help, right? All of these programs that help people improve in some way, they're built on a mentorship, a sponsorship, a partnership. It doesn't have to cost, right? You can get a peer to be helping you through this journey. So Nick, any final words you'd like to share, I guess, as a parting thought, or words of wisdom for us?
Yes, I think the most important thing, and a friend of mine, he wrote a book called Just Ask. His name is Andy Lopata from London. And, just ask if there's something on your mind, write it down. And again, come back to this, write it down. If you have an issue, a challenge, write it down, and then think about, who can I ask for help? There's so many people There's so many people around you who love you, and don't be shy to ask for their help. Or anonymous organization coaches and mentors are all there, and just take that first step towards taking control of your own life and lead yourself.
Phone a friend. I love it. Well, thank you, Nick, for joining us today, and enjoy the journey.
Thank you.